Мы расширим номенклатуру таких.
The Russian president has delivered one of his strongest messages to Europe, warning that if the continent chooses war with Moscow, Russia is fully prepared to respond. In fact, Putin warned that escalation could reach a stage where, in his words, no one would remain on the European side for Moscow to negotiate with. Let's just play out for you what the Russian president said.
Мы не собираемся воевать с Европой, я уже об этом 100 раз сказал.
We are not planning to fight Europe. I have said this 100 times. But if Europe suddenly decides to wage a war against us and starts it, we are ready right now. If Europe chooses to start a war, the situation can very quickly reach a point where there will be no one left for us to negotiate with.
Putin accused Ukraine's European allies of deliberately derailing the US-led diplomatic efforts that have intensified in recent weeks. He said Europe keeps rewriting the peace proposals with demands that Moscow will never entertain, effectively sabotaging the process and then shifting blame onto Russia. Now, these remarks are coming days after the European Union's top diplomat, remember, expressed concern that the US attempts to push Ukraine into a lopsided peace plan would only encourage Russia's warmongering. Estonia also signaled that it would send troops to Ukraine if a future security arrangement placed peacekeeping forces inside the country. And Putin further threatened to cut off Ukraine's maritime access, citing drone attacks on Russia's shadow fleet operating in the Black Sea.
The most radical solution is to cut Ukraine off from the sea. Then piracy will be impossible for Ukraine in principle.
Now, earlier, Putin hosted a high-profile meeting at the Kremlin with the special envoy Steve Witkoff and US President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Following the meeting, the Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov has said peace remains distant. He stated that the US proposal discussed in the 5-hour session was divided into 4 main areas, yet the two sides could not reach common ground on the most contentious topic, which is territorial issues. And the Kremlin later reported that Putin accepted parts of the US draft deal while rejecting others. And that Russia is ready to keep meeting with American negotiators for as long as necessary to reach a final agreement. While during his visit to Ireland, the Ukrainian president said he was afraid the United States could lose interest in the peace process and alleged that Russia's goal was to bring this about. Trump, on the other hand, referenced the negotiations during his final cabinet meeting of 2025, describing the conflict as chaotic and difficult to solve.
8 wars, this would be the 9th, and our people are over in Russia right now to see if we can get it settled. Not an easy situation, let me tell you. What a mess. It's a war that never would have happened if I were president. Not even a chance. And it didn't happen for 4 years.
And as the battlefield as well as the diplomatic channels remain active, Putin's latest warning leaving Europe confronting the possibility of a conflict from which the Russian president says no negotiating partners may survive, according to him. China firing its boldest shot in its population battle, attacks on condoms, a shock move to force a demographic turnaround in a way. Beijing fighting population freefall with cash, carrots and policy sticks, but will it work is the question. Our next report telling you more.
The greatest threat to a superpower is rarely military. It is often demographic. China's industrial engine is slowing, starved of the one resource it can't import: young people. Now Beijing is resorting to a desperate, controversial economic move to force population growth. A policy turn no one saw coming. Beijing is imposing a 13% tax on condoms and contraceptives. After 3 decades of exemption, Beijing is putting a price tag on protection, hoping money might do what slogans and subsidies couldn't: make China have more babies. The urgency is real. China's population is falling at a record speed, shrinking by millions each year. Births in 2024 hit the lowest level since the founding of the People's Republic. Beijing has tried almost everything. Scrapped the one-child policy, introduced the 3-child norm, rolled out cash rewards, home subsidies, cheaper mortgages, extended maternity leave, and even pushed local governments to fund IVF treatments. But none of it has slowed the slide. Young Chinese remain unconvinced, weighed down by insane work hours, brutal housing prices, and fears of raising children in an ultra-competitive world. The new condom tax is Beijing's latest pressure tactics. Officials say the aim is simple: shift mindsets, make contraception less convenient, make childbirth feel economically smarter. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Our next story is from India, where on Wednesday, the rupee fell to a fresh record low of over 90 per dollar. As delays in concluding the crucial trade deal with America continue to dent sentiments in a way, the rupee weakened as much as 0.5% to the symbolic new low, and that pessimism also spilling over into the equity market, with the benchmark NSE Nifty 50 index declining as much as 0.5%. Remember, India is still among the few major economies yet to seal the deal with the US, even though officials are optimistic about that happening soon. But the 50% tariffs imposed on Indian goods by the Trump administration, partly as punitive measures for continued purchase of Russian oil, have weighed on the exporters, while strong imports have kept the dollar demand high, adding pressure on the rupee. So basically a combination of these factors created a supply-demand imbalance in the foreign exchange market, leading to the depreciation pressures on the Indian currency. And as per analysts, the Reserve Bank of India has defended the rupee through aggressive dollar sales to support key levels, but also appears of late to be allowing greater currency flexibility. And with inflation running well below expectations, the RBI's priority basically has been focused on supporting growth rather than expending the reserves to hold an artificial line. So that means that India's central bank was intervening only to ease the volatility, not to reverse a trend driven by the fundamentals. To be clear, analysts expect the rupee to settle in a 88 to 92 range. Indeed, this year's weakness of the rupee has been driven by higher US tariffs on Indian exports and the exodus of foreign investors from the local stock market as a result. But possible improvements in US-India trade ties and a lower tariff rate could also ease pressure on the currency. But if that doesn't eventuate, the RBI may be forced to support the rupee further. What exactly is the real-world impact of all of this? Yes, a weaker rupee makes Indian goods and services cheaper abroad, boosting export competitiveness. This also helps to offset the tariff pressures facing exporters as India seeks to expand its markets by signing trade deals with countries like the UK. And there is a silver lining. India is the world's largest recipient of remittances, remember, with a record $137 billion flowing into the country in 2024, according to the World Bank. A softer currency basically means every dollar remitted buys more rupees, lifting the household incomes and the consumption. In 2024, India received $137 to $138 billion in remittances. That's more than double any other country. In fact, for rural and low-income families, this extra money is the real uplift, sometimes funding education, healthcare, or property investments. On the flip side, a weaker rupee makes imports more expensive, pushing up the cost of essential items like oil, fertilizers, electronics, most of which India buys from overseas. And the rupee's fall past 90 is more than a number as such. It's a marker of a new phase in India's economic story. It also shows that in letting the rupee float, India's policy makers are betting on long-term gains over short-term defense. The size of modern cars is emerging as a major focus in Europe. Such vehicles are reportedly getting longer, wider, heavier, and also more popular than ever. And several parts are clamping down on them reportedly, citing large vehicles becoming a serious urban problem. Paris, for example, is notorious for its traffic jams. For 2 decades, the city has pushed to reduce congestion and pollution. It has rolled out low-emission zones, promoted cycling, public transport, and now it is targeting heavy cars. Since October 2024, visitors who park large vehicles on Paris streets pay sharply higher fees. Charges tripled after a public vote, rising from 6 to 18 euros for a single hour in central areas, and from 75 to 225 euros for 6 hours. Officials said the move accelerates the city's environmental transition. And months later, a steep drop was reported, with the number of very heavy cars parking on the streets falling by 2/3. Other parts are also paying attention. In Wales, Cardiff has already approved higher residential parking permits for cars weighing more than 2,400 kilograms, roughly double the size of a subcompact car. In fact, the city is reportedly planning to gradually lower that weight limit. Several councils in the UK are studying similar measures reportedly. Cars across Europe keep growing. According to a UK-based research institute, since 2018, the average width of new cars has climbed from 182 to 187.5 centimeters, while average weight has jumped from around 1,360 to nearly 1,600 kilograms. And this trend, it claims, stretches back decades, driven partly by consumer demand and partly by new safety features that make vehicles heavier. France already charges extra registration tax on cars weighing more than 1,600 kilograms, a penalty that can rise to as much as 70,000 euros for the very heaviest models. The debate over the future of big cars in Europe is only getting more intense. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.